Welcome back to another episode of the Wet Pastelist. This Wet Pastel channel is all about using soft pastels and different wet mediums to create different effects. Today's episode is all about analogous colors. It's about color theory. And I'll use some wet techniques once I block in and show you how analogous colors go together. Now, analogous colors are any 2 to 4 colors that are side by side on the color wheel. I'll stick a still up there, but here's a set of analogous colors. And then to darken those colors or make grays, whatever is opposite these colors becomes your complements that you can use to gray down if you don't want to just use tints, shades, and tones. So let's get started, and I'm going to demo how to block in using analogous colors and show you how once you pick out a color palette of those 2 to 4 colors side by side, almost anything you do to your painting, it's going to work. You don't have to worry about grabbing what color to grab. So let's get started with the demo, and I'll block this thing in for you. Okay, before I get started, if you're enjoying the content on these videos, please hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, hit that like button because it lets others looking for color theory and things find this information. Again, this is my color scheme or the color palette that I'll be using to illustrate analogous colors. With fall coming, I thought that these would be good colors to use. We've got a little bit of green left in some of the trees and shrubs in the fall, and we've got some oranges. Now down here are the complements of those colors, and that's how we will gray down and make variations with these. On another video, you'll see how these are the color hues. These are the tints when you add white. These are the tone when you add a neutral gray. And these are the shade from these hues when you add black to these basic hue colors. I'm not going to go back through that, but there's another video on how to make tints, shades, and hues. When we want to make some of our darks, we'll be using these colors in the color wheel, which are the complements of these colors. So let's get started. I'm going to block in with some of these colors. I'll block in my darks using some of those complement colors. I'm just going to do a simple little landscape that is some trees, a small little foreground. I'm just going to block this in roughly with some of these complementary colors, and we'll go over that so we get those grays that we might need. I'm not going to take this to a finish, but I'm just going to show you how the complementary colors will work through the block-in stage, and then you could build up your own painting after that. We'll stick in some of these blues in just to mix up some of these complement colors in some of these darks. And who knows, we might even have a sunset come out of this, but our goal here is just to illustrate how these complementary colors can work for you to create a painting or an underpainting that you could go ahead with later, and that underpainting becomes something that you could turn into a finished painting. But again, like I said, we're not going to go that direction. And I'm picking some of the darker of the oranges and the yellow oranges because underneath these trees off in the distance there's often shadows. And I'm going to get some of these oranges in here, come off the edges a little bit. When we wet this down, I'll wet this down with probably alcohol today so you can just see the traditional wet techniques that I've described for my students in some of these other videos. For right now, I'm just going to block in the sky. The sky could be traditional blue, but a nice yellow underpainting. And when we wet this thing down, you will see how these colors will blend, and because they're side by side on the color wheel, we'll get this analogous blending of colors that are related to one another next to each other. So you'll see how that works once I add the alcohol. Alright, I'm going to put just a little bit of blue up in the sky. It'll mix with that and come out to be green, but it will at least give us the value that we need to finish the sky off later. Put a little bit through there. I'll get a little orange up in there too. That maybe will make that go more gray than green, because blue and orange are what? They're complements, aren't they? Okay, my favorite tool when I do wet pastel techniques, my favorite tool is the chip brush, the little cheap 69-cent and dollar chip brushes. I start with my lightest colors first when I do wet pastel underpaintings. And this could be water, this could be isopropyl like I'm using here today on UArt 400 sanded. So I hit the light areas first, and then I come in and I start working my way towards the dark areas. And we're not too concerned, we'll get some running, but we're trying to get this mixed up. Now this is a 91% isopropyl mix, and it doesn't really matter whether it's 70% or 91 or 96 or 80 or 90, it just doesn't matter. It just dries faster the higher the percentage alcohol. So if you want to be able to blend these colors a little bit more than what I am, as you do this process, you'll want to use a lesser percent alcohol, because this evaporates really fast. If I was outside, this would be almost instantaneous. Now I'm going to skip the trees, and I'm going to go down here and get this little wedge of green-orange grass that's down in here, and then I'll work my way down to the bottom where I added some blue and orange, and work my way back now up into some of these darker colors. They're going to run, if you get too much alcohol on there, they're going to run down into that grass, but again, it's an underpainting, so we're just trying to get some of these basic colors added in so that we've got a nice underpainting that we can put those analogous colors over. And by doing this, you end up having layers show through as you paint over this with dry pastel later. Just a little simple composition, pretty standard. Next year you'll see my videos on composition, and I'll use terms like the steel yard. Well, this is a steel yard composition that is a well-known design for artists when they're trying to lay out something and make the eye follow known designs through history. And that's a neat little composition. It's one of my favorite, the steel yard. And now I got a little bit of paint from down in here. I can bring it up in here. I can gray that sky down while this is still wet, and I can work my way down in there. See how those colors are all starting, because they're related to one another on the color wheel, they're all starting to blend together well. This is why you'll hear often a lot of instructors say, work on the entire painting. Don't work on one area and then the next area. You're working on those paintings because in various parts, but at the same time in order to blend some of those colors that you've selected to use. So right now this went a lot violet, but it's related to the colors we're using because we went directly across and used the complements on the color wheel. Now that's about as far as I'm going to take this. You can soften some of those sharp edges if your drawing was in charcoal or something like that. Okay, let's let that dry, and then we'll start applying some of those colors beyond the block-in stage. But again, I'm not taking it all the way to the finish, but you'll see how those harmonious colors and this underpainting will start to work together. There's just a few spots on here that are not completely dry yet, but we can go into those and we won't have too much too much problem going into wet areas. But by the time I get this done or get this started after the alcohol wash, we should be pretty well dry. I can just see just 2 or 3 areas in the dark areas. I want to start by just placing, I call this a place setter. This is kind of my 1/3 mark. So I'm going to put something that's kind of going to be a highlight there. I don't know whether it's just going to be a light spot in the sky, or by the time I get this done, it might become part of a sunset, or where the sun is getting ready to set, or under some clouds. I don't have a reference for this because this is just a demo, so I'm not too worried about what that actually is going to turn into at this particular point. Okay, so we've got some nice violets, which are the opposite of the colors on our color wheel that we selected, and we can go in here and we can create, if you had a photo source, you would have trees, and you could follow those shadows and shapes of those trees. I do a lot of plein air painting and have done in years past, so it kind of lets me know how, without a photo source in this demo, to be able to put things in a place that is going to make it look like trees by the time we're done. And in the fall, we've got a few greens that are left, little places that are not turning color yet. Maybe it hasn't frosted and killed off some of the grasses in a meadow that might be in the front. The light comes through and hits some of those places, so we'll get a little green in there. It's that yellow green. It's not so it's still related to the yellows and the oranges that we've got in there, so just a little bit there. Okay, earlier you saw I had this darker blue. It was in order to be the opposite of if I stuck an orange in here and I wanted to create it and gray it down, like there's kind of a brownish orange and I wanted to gray it down. I could mix this darker blue with it and get kind of a gray in there. So because I've done the wash already, I've selected more colors out of my box. And this is for the blue sky. And it's a kind of a light blue, and if I stick it in here over some of this yellow I put in, I can create the effect of a sky. I'd want a little darker blue where the sky comes up over our heads. There's less atmosphere, and the color hues of the blue overhead are a lot richer and a lot purer, and that's where I went back to that blue that I showed you earlier. But I can mix that with some of this, and we can create the effect of a blue sky. We want to get a little orange in there, and there's a little yellow orange in places in that sky. And we could add clouds in there if we wanted to. Okay, so now I've gotten some colors back into here that are part of our analogous colors. They're all related to one another again. And we might have some shrubs in front of these trees over here, and maybe along the edge of this. And I've just kind of blocked it in, and we've got a good harmony of colors, because again, that's the point of analogous colors, is they're side by side and they're related, and then their complements are all related too. So if I use a complement that's a red violet, which is the opposite of the yellow green, down in here, it's going to work with the yellow greens. If I have the yellow orange and I use a blue violet at its complement, they're going to be just like the analogous colors. Our orange, yellow, and yellow green are related on the color wheel. So too are the complements. They're all related. So we're really cutting out, when we pick analogous colors, remember the definition is any 2 to 4 colors that are side by side on the color wheel. That is an analogous palette. All right? So we could have just as easily said, we're going to keep this much narrower and be yellow, orange, and orange. Okay? But we have the option of going to this end, which is yellow, green, or we could have come to this end, which is red-orange. So if it's a really, really late fall and you want a lot of those reds, you could have gone that way, where most of the greens are gone. But you're still going to get a few greens when you use this yellow down here. You'll get some greens in your tones and in your shades. So this is what we picked. This is what it is. I'm going to blend this with a blending stump, my hand, or whatever. You don't need to use the same tools I'm using, but we'll blend this in and it will kind of even out and give us some ideas. We went from the big blocked areas of just the sky, the almost silhouetted trees, and these wedges in the foreground, to now starting to refine this down and getting a little bit more detail in some of these things. So let's blend these things up. Before my hands get too dirty, I'm going to use my fingers. Now I have got a whole video on using different blending tools. Because blending, there are different effects. And that video goes through and demonstrates some of those effects. But by going in here and blending, we can start to get some of those blue grays. We can start to get some smoother areas. If you decided to put clouds in there, we would have a lot more variation. But again, I'm just trying to do a simple demo here. And I'm up in these blues and these blue oranges, and when I come down into the middle tones, I'm creating a nice little gray effect. And even at the sky, if that's too yellow for you and you don't want more of the yellows in there, you could just turn this into a light blue gray. You can see as I add those blues into that yellow and the oranges, we're getting less of a bright sky there. And then I'm going to get this little wedge. Again, I'm working from my lights to dark. There's different effects you get when you work lights to darks to light. And we added some of those red oranges to try. This was all one solid color when we did the underpainting, remember? And now we added some things where there might be some shrubs catching some light and things like that. I like to put the sky holes in near the end of the painting. So these are just shapes against the sky, and as we get near the end of the painting, if I were taking this to finish, you would see me add those sky holes. There's other episodes where you see me add them as I do my color theory. I take each one of these paintings a little bit further along or less along, because the goal here on color theory is just for you to see how analogous colors that are next to one another really blend well. You don't have to guess, oh, what color am I going to use now? Once you pick out those colors, then those are the colors you know you can go to your box and they're going to work because they're side by side. Too many artists that don't understand color theory will just start putting some greens and blues down. The sky's blue and it's green, and oh, there's a building over there that is maybe blue-green, all right? So they'll put a car or a blue-green object in there. Well, look at this. There are no blue-greens. Blue-green is one of the things we covered up. So by keeping this analogous color and being control of your color, you won't have the difficulties of, man, something's wrong with this painting. That blue-green's not working. What color should I use? This solves that once you learn this part of color theory. So at this point, I don't normally put tree trunks and things like that in there. If it helps you, you could take a charcoal or something like that, and if it helps you build a tree, sometimes having that skeleton down in here for where the tree is will help people build that tree. But that's beyond the scope of this illustration. I normally put the tree trunks in later in the process, and I typically try to look at the shapes. If I'm outside, I try to look at the shapes and build this tree based on the shapes that are dark against light and light against dark. So you can start to formulate where these branches come out, where your light source is. If we had a photograph, I could illustrate that, but I'm just really just showing you how once you block in things, you start to illustrate these things and make some of these differences just in small steps, not big wide swaths. We already did that. Our wide swath time is over, unless it's up here in the sky in order to get more blue or something in there. I've got a very light touch on this. I'm using the side and the ends and some of the shapes of the pastels, the rounded corners and things. And I put a little more blue in there so we don't have so much yellow. Get a little yellow orange in there. Might stick just a little bit on the tips of some of these things, just to start to define where some of these branches and things go. Like I said, you could have clouds and start developing those in this. I'm going to mix a little orange with that light blue that I just added there. So there we go. It's far enough along that you could begin to be in the middle of this particular painting and start to increase the amount of details, increase where the edges of trees meet the sky, increase the grays in the sky, reduce some of those yellow greens. But still, even though we haven't refined this, you can see how we're already starting to get a few more details, and this thing would build on up with more branches and layers in the trees. You might get some more orange, rusty oranges down in the foreground here where some of the grasses have already started to change. You've got different weeds, different times of the year in meadows, and so you break up those lines that are in there and just start to build this thing detail by detail, area by area. And I wanted to show you, this is a piece of pipe insulation cut off. Again, go to my video if you want to see how this varies from your finger. But if you've got some areas that are just too many marks, the pipe insulation is good because you get these sharp edges. Again, go see that blending video where I use about 6 different ways to blend and how each one varies just slightly. The more tools you use in your painting process, the more variation you'll have and the happier you'll be with the end product. So I can use this and move and make sharp edges that are just too sharp. I can move this and make trees off in the distance and add some violets to them later. So these are all things that as we develop this painting. But the bottom line is, okay, that violet is the opposite of yellow. And what do I have here? I have a little bit of a yellow in this kind of blue sky. If I wanted to keep that yellow, and I use violet in some of these trees, then like a light violet, then those trees would contrast really well and look like we've got foreground, middle ground, and distance trees off into the hazy distance behind. There's probably a field or more trees between this middle ground and those trees that would be back in here. So that's basically how you do that, is you get those, there's a little violet. I'll just add that up in there and we'll get some of that blue back in there, so we got a blue violet that's off in the distance. And you'll see that that could easily be trees off in the distance as we pull those browns in, if you wanted to create a distance. Pretty flat, pretty, not very interesting, but I wanted to show you how you could do that. And then you've got your trees and this middle ground set of trees. Or you might even have, like I said, you might even be able to get a sense of that there's some meadow and stuff that hasn't changed in the background there. by adding that yellow-green, which is in our analogous colors, you might be able to simulate the foreground, a fence row with some fields in the distance, and then our trees off in the distance with, again, our sky coming down. And we'll get a little you could even turn this into a sunset scene if you wanted to. It's just all a matter of using, I went from violets to oranges to blues, and it all works. It all starts to build layers, and it all works because these are related colors on the color wheel. I sure hope that helped you, and again, as I mentioned, hit that like button or subscribe. But next week I'll have something good for you. This week I hope you got something out of how color theory with analogous colors kind of holds everything together, keeps your colors as you move them around, whether they're local colors that are realistic or whether they're abstract colors to create whatever you're painting. They all work because they're side by side. It simplifies, once you understand analogous, it simplifies how to go forward. So until next time, happy painting, and I'll have another great wet pastel episode for you. Bye-bye.